Good morning, children. I'm Mrs. Bana and I'm going to be teaching you science for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to first recap what we did last week. Last week we're looking at different types of materials, on how they can change, how we can change materials when squashing, twisting, bending and stretching them. This week we will learn about materials when they are heated and cooled. I'm sure most of you have experienced that when you're eating a chocolate or an ice cream, it is hard at first, but then it starts melting and getting soft because of the heat. So when you're holding a chocolate in your hand, and because the heat from your hand, it starts melting. When you're eating an ice cream, you find that the ice cream is nice and cold and hard, but because of the heat of the environment, it starts melting slowly, sometimes very quickly. So in the same way, when you put water in a freezer or in your ice tray, you put water inside, you put the ice tray in the freezer, it becomes frozen, it becomes a solid. When we take it out, it will start melting and it forms a liquid. I'm going to demonstrate a candle being lit. When a candle is lit up, it melts, and when it cools, it turns to become a solid and forms wax. So I'm going to show you. I've lit this candle. You see the candle? It's been melting. If you look at the wax is dripping. Can you see this wax here? It's dripping down. So this is the wax that is forming. So once you light a candle, it's a solid. When it's melting, when it's heated up, it starts melting and it forms a liquid. But when it dries up, it becomes a solid again. So this is called wax. So the wax forms a solid. If you can see, it's breaking up into a solid. But as it's melting, if you look at the candle, you can see that it's melting, it's dripping. So it's dripping here and it's dripping down. But when it's drying up, it's forming a solid again. So, can you see the wax that is formed at the bottom? Because the candle started melting. If I have to drip, look at the light, I'm dripping, it's melting, and the wax is going to be dripping into the container. So that means it's melting the wax. Can you see that it's dripping? Can you see it dripping there? There's the drops. So that means the wax is melting. It's dripping again. And now it's forming a solid again. Once it starts cooling, it will form the wax. So this is what you call the wax. And there you are. Closer look. Find it dripping again. There, it's dripping there. Can you see that? It's dripping. So that means it is melting. And this is all the wax. From the drip, it's dripping off, it melts, and it forms wax again. So if you look at the container, the wax has all formed inside, and it's become hard again. So you can make it into put it together and it will form a solid. Did you understand that? Now that you understand what happens when certain materials are heated, they melt, and when they are cooled, they become a solid again. So there's a worksheet that you're going to complete. I'll explain the worksheet. It says heating materials. Now what happens when you heat them? So if you look at a metal, what happens to a metal when you heat them? if you heat a metal, it will melt. If at very high temperatures, it will start melting. And can we change them back? You have to write whether yes or no, whether you can change it back to its original shape or you can't. Cheese. When cheese melts, what happens to a cheese? When you put cheese on your bread and you toast it, what happens to the cheese? And can you put the cheese back to a solid after melting it? You have to write yes or no in this column here. This column here, you've got to just write whether it gets melted, or if it melts, or if it stays, if it's a solid, or if it gets cooked, what happens to it. So cheese would melt. Eggs, what happens when you cook eggs? It's a liquid form, it becomes a solid. Wood, what happens to wood? When you burn wood or heat wood, it's going to burn up. It's not, and you cannot change it back. So will you be able to change it back? You must say yes or no. Chocolate, what happens to chocolate? When you melt it, what happens to it? Can you change it back? Does it go back to a solid? Bread, once it's baked, can you reverse it? Can you change it back? What happens to bread when it's baked? It's raw, then when it's cooked, what happens to it? Wax, I've shown you the example of wax. What happens to it when it's heated? And can you turn it back to a solid? Milk, milk is a liquid. When you heat it up, what happens to it? And clay, you're going to when you heat up clay, does it melt, and can you put it back to a solid? So that's what you're going to do on this worksheet. Thank you. I hope you understand what to do. This is the end of this lesson. Thank you.